Joined today by Izzet Akosman. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name right there. He's a doctor, or he's going to be a doctor. He's a medical school student here, and he has been using nested knowledge probably longer than I have. I will say, and I'll ask him a little bit about his early days with nested knowledge in just a second here when I introduce him. But the reason I had him on today for this new series that we're doing on nested knowledge super users, people who are really competent in our software and are able to get really good work out of our software, is because I think he would be a really good person to illustrate how to get published in medical school early and really kind of accelerate your journey as a doctor. So that's you today. If you're a medical school student, if you're in residency, if you're trying to get published, or if you're thinking about going to medical school and you just want to start doing some research, you want to dabble in clinical research today, he's going to be a really good person to kind of talk to. And I have his email up on our screen right now. So if you take a look at the QR code, if you scan that, you can send him an email, and I'll throw that up on the end as well. And he'll be happy to answer your questions about how to get started with nested knowledge offline as well. Two, today we have the chat as well. So wherever you're watching, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, whether you're watching on LinkedIn, you can chat to us, and you can send in your questions, and I will attempt to make time for them at the end and get your question answered. Whether it's about nested knowledge, whether it's about Izzet, or whether it's about how to get started and get published early on in your career, I would love to hear your questions. So that's me. I'm Jeff Johnson. Let's talk about you though. What's your name? And tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started with nested knowledge.
Hey, thanks for the intro. So I'm Izzet. I'm in medical school. I'm a rising fourth year at Weill Cornell in New York. In terms of my intro to nested, I was in college when Kevin and Keith reached out to me through a job post. I started working with them in the early prototypes of nested. So before it was anything like the platform now, I was working in R, trying to code different ways of visualizing data, going through Google's search, PubMed, finding papers. So I worked with them. I worked on the promotional material, on the research aspects of it. And then after that, because I was familiar with the concept of meta-analysis, systematic review, I started using nested in college. In med school, and then found it was very helpful, especially in your first couple of years. Getting into research can be challenging, so I kind of had a bit of a jump start coming into med school, and I've been using nested the whole time since, whether it's my own projects, helping other people set up their own systematic reviews. So it's always been on my bookmarks tab that I've been using.
Let's back up even further. So you met Kevin probably before I even met Kevin, right? So I've been designing the software for a while now, but you were kind of working with Kevin in the early days when it was really just a kind of a twinkle in his eye, right? How did you meet him?
He was actually working. He had another company called Superior Medical Experts.
Yes. Okay.
I
right.
interviewed to join that company as a medical writer. But then I started doing other projects. I started making promotional materials, market research. As I said, I was coding other parts of the visualizations. So my role kind of transitioned. I remember when he came back one summer, he was like, "Oh, I was at NIH. I got this grant. I'm starting this new thing called nested knowledge." And that was the first intro. That was maybe 2018,
Sure.
right around there.
Yeah. So you said you used nested knowledge kind of throughout your medical school career to get published, sometimes in a collaborative setting, sometimes on your own. Tell us about some of the publications that you've completed in nested knowledge, and tell us about what that process kind of looked like.
Yeah, so the first paper I published, it was also my first. It was my first author as well. It was a systematic review meta-analysis on comparing low versus high dose TXA. So that's an agent that's used in large spine surgeries to limit the bleeding. If you give a lot of it, there's a potential risk of clotting, of pulmonary embolisms and DVTs, but that really hasn't been shown. So what we wanted to do was compare studies that have a high and a low dose and show that the complications or adverse events from both arms were comparable. I feel that as a first publication, meta-analyses are also very good because you don't
Mm,
need access to Epic or any kind of hospital base or hospital
right.
data. You don't have to be familiar with like how to do search and queries in the database of the hospital. You can just get started on your own. Like day one, even without a PI, even without an attending, you could search it yourself, compile it together, and it kind of gives you that flexibility when you don't have the access to other elements. Since
No
then,
budget, right? Like you just can
yeah,
go out
again,
there and you can make things happen. You
like,
can
and there's
make
no like
real,
patient confidentiality. There's no IRB
right,
requirements, anything like that. I could start one right now without telling anyone, which is,
right.
but that's really hard. Even if you want to do a case report, you got to find the patient, find the attending.
Mhm.
It's a lot of steps, which takes a while. If you ask an attending, they get back to you in a week, and then they meet the next week, and then it's just like a lot of these steps. But with these meta-analyses, you can start now, and then do as much as you want or as little.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
That was the first one. Since then, I've done one about racial disparities in spine surgery. I've helped a lot of other people set up their nests. So I'm second or third authored on a lot of those. The most recent one I did was looking at the definitions of PJK, which is proximal junctional kyphosis. It's very heterogeneously defined in the literature. So
Mm,
it wasn't even a meta-analysis. It was just looking at all the possible definitions and then seeing which ones are used most often, finding trends over
yeah.
time to kind of show to the community, like, hey, this thing is not really defined. We have all these papers reporting PJK, but it's seldom the same thing. So again, it doesn't have to be a meta-analysis. It can just be a review of an interesting phenomena. I just noticed that PJK was defined differently. I told my attending, hey, let's look at the definitions
Yeah.
used, and then got started.
That's so valuable. So you have experience early on doing meta-analysis and some qualitative work, all of which is just contributing to your field, even before you've got that PhD, you've got that doctor in front of your name, right? So how did you get first author early on in your career? How did you make that happen?
So when you first come to med school, the way they suggest you get into research is to email attendings, find an
Mhm.
attending that in a field that you like. You email 5 people, 3 respond, 1 or 2 are interested. I kind of made the email more specific. I said, hey, I can do a meta-analysis because I
Mhm.
knew how.
Mm.
And then, do you have any ideas for meta-analysis? I think that's a bit more deliberate. Instead of saying,
Mhm.
hey, I want to do research, do you have any projects? I was more like, hey, I can do this project. Can you give me an idea?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, that is honestly that gets you a lot more responses. And then at that moment, my attending happened to be thinking about TXA, and he was like, "Hey, all right, go do it."
Yeah. Yeah.
And then because I didn't need all this like training and understanding, I just got going, and I could kind of consult him for how to structure it and what dose is high, what dose is low. But that independence helped me become first author. One thing I
Yeah.
didn't do
Yeah.
well was I didn't what's the word, delegate. So I did it all by myself. So
Okay.
it took a
Okay.
lot longer than it could have. So now later in med school, I always try and involve other people as well,
Yeah.
because it doesn't matter if there's 3 authors or 10 authors in the paper, because
Right.
you're not really diluting anything. So delegating and finding others to collaborate with speeds things up a lot as well, I've learned.
Yeah, and banding together makes that process go even faster because even though it feels kind of long while you're in it, you really to churn out as many papers as you might want to, getting that collaborative piece going is probably going to be helpful. Let's talk about how you use nested knowledge to facilitate that collaboration, though, because I know you have some interesting ideas as to how you kind of use the system in somewhat of a sort of a backwards way. You've got some hacks to it. So do you want to just share your screen maybe? And talk about how you use nested knowledge, maybe the normal way a little bit, but then also how you kind of get the most out of it. Yeah, let me get this going for you. So I'll share your screen here, and yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so these are all my nests that I've started. I think that was the first one. So all these ones I've started since. Not all of them came to fruition. Some projects get dropped. They're not all mine either.
Yeah.
So I guess this one's the one I remember most. So I think one of the best parts of nested is the literature search, search exploration. Yeah,
Yeah,
because when you go
yeah,
on
yeah.
PubMed and you have to put in all the terms, the mesh terms, and you have to use the and or, um, it gets very complicated with all the parentheses. So this basically, I can never write this by myself. Even if I have to do a PubMed search without
Right.
using nested for something, I will come to nested, create the search, and then copy paste this in
Sure.
PubMed because I understand what this is. I don't understand what this is.
Right.
And you're always going to leave a parenthesis somewhere extra and you get weird results you don't know. Also, it gives you
Right.
the results here so you can kind of add things and then watch this number change as it gets to a smaller number,
Yeah, yeah,
preferably.
yeah.
So the search exploration, I use it every single time. And then also I have to import searches as well because
Hmm.
I think this does PubMed and one other one, but it doesn't do all the databases yet.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and then screening is also very nice. I like that a lot. So here everything's screened, but going in order and it shows you like you can skip them as well, and then creating the
Hmm.
exclusion reasons. That's all very standard for me. Tagging, I think tagging is cool because you can customize it as you want.
Hmm.
So I don't really go through the whole tagging system where you tag individuals. You haven't tagged any of these. I think tagging happens more organically and plans change.
Hmm.
So for example, I have definitions so for PJK and PJF, but then I have this thing called MISC, miscellaneous. So I have things. So for example, if I need to get work done and I want to pull the mean follow-up from papers, I'll
Oh
create
yeah.
called needs mean follow-up, and I'll bulk action that onto everything. So I'll add tagging, apply tag, and I'll add, for example, needs whatever. So mean needs this. And so let's say I decide to pull this tag or pull this data later on. I'll find all the
Hmm.
papers, add this, and then sort by needs that. So then now I know these are the papers I need to do that for. Um,
Hmm.
and then I can kind of structure my papers based on the work that needs to be done. Um,
Interesting. So you're using them almost as a way to kind of the tags, not as a way to just think about what needs to be extracted, but also as a way to kind of collect your thoughts while you're in the midst of this project. Because otherwise, it's kind of tough to keep track of which papers need what, right? Which papers still need a certain touch, right?
here's another nest. Here, for example, we have people's names. I put stars next to some papers to review them. I call them some of them notes. So if I need to cite them later, star means like, oh, this is a good one. That's a really solid one that can
Hmm.
be as a reference. Again, any thoughts I have, anything I want to remember for later. If I want to assign something to Rick, for example, I'll tag it Rick, and then Rick will go and see, okay, like what papers do I have to do now? And he'll go to Rick, the tag Rick, and then
Sure.
find his workload. And that's another way of delegating as well. Let's see.
Sure. So yeah. So if you've got 10 researchers in here and you want to allocate papers to them, this is one way to do it. You could certainly come in here and you could say, hey, these are going to be Rick's papers. These are going to be Izzet's papers. These are going to be Jeff's papers, right? And now that person can then click on each of those rows and do what they need to do in it. That's what you're saying, right?
Exactly.
It's sort of form of
Yeah.
allocation. Yeah. Cool.
And then finally, one other thing is because the people I work with have different levels of understanding. So, for example, getting the PDFs is relatively easy, and then
Yeah.
getting the country of the paper is kind of middle. But then extracting the dosage or the specific definition has more nuance sometimes. So
Hmm.
I'll for example, where is the one where publication status? No full text. Here we go. Full text status.
Hmm.
So I'll find all the papers that are missing full text. I'll make a tag saying needs PDF, and I'll
Hmm.
assign that to someone more junior. And then
Yep.
the papers that need a definition, I'll assign that to someone more senior. I was
Hmm.
actually doing a paper before um, where I was working with high school students,
Yeah.
and I would assign them, for example, like start them off with getting the PDFs, and then once they did that, I'd assign them a bit more complicated tag. So then I got one or two high
Really.
school students published with that. Um, Again,
That's awesome.
the level of understanding is very important. Not everyone can extract everything, but having those tags kind of lets me bucket the hard, medium, and easy
That
tasks.
That is
right?
a fascinating take. Is that I don't know if you know this, but I used to be a high school English teacher pre NK before all this, and one of the concepts, and I think you inherently probably understand this, or maybe you have some formal education training yourself. I don't know, but there's this notion of scaffolding learning, right? So you start with something that's within the zone of understanding, the proximal zone of understanding for that student or for whoever that person is that you're working with, and then you expand that zone slightly outside their comfort zone, and that's one of the ways that learning can happen, right? So you're coming in here and you're saying, "Okay, I've got a first year medical student, or even a high school student, or whoever, somebody in undergrad, right?" And you're saying, "What do they understand?" And you're sort of evaluating where their understanding is at, and then you create a task for them that is within that zone, and then you can slowly expand into it until they're doing a meta-analysis alongside you. They're getting first author. So that's awesome. That's very cool. Um, what other features? So we've talked a little bit about tagging. We've talked a little bit about how you use nested knowledge to collaborate. What other features do you think provide the most value to someone like you, a medical school student, a medical student who's trying to kind of get published early and often?
Um, I think, yeah. So the ones I've mentioned so far, I use every single time.
Yeah,
I'll give you an example of this one. So in this nest, for example, so sometimes you start a project and you don't really know what data to even collect. So some
sure.
papers report one outcome, but then they don't have one independent variable. So a lot of it is kind of figuring out what's reported most consistently, and then basing your question on that,
Yeah,
which is a little backwards, but
it's a little bit of a chicken or the egg, right? You've got a
yeah,
blank
but
page in front of
again,
you.
it's the
Yeah.
only way to do it because you can only report on the things that are most commonly published.
Mhm.
So I'm going to find this. So, for example, interventions, I was looking at TXA, but then I was looking at other coagulants, at IV
Mhm.
TXA and non-IV TXA alternatives, right? So, topical, oral, or these are all other medications that could be coagulants. So, I categorize everything and trying to see if there's, here we go. Now we have low dose is 10 or less, 11 and
Yeah.
29, 100. So, the tagging helps you categorize everything. So, you first categorize by, IV, non-IV TXA, and other. And then you see, okay, let me look at the non-IVs. What exists? These two. Okay, that's not really going anywhere. Kill it. And then you go into other coagulants. You can see what's out there, and then that's a way of exploring what you could
Yeah.
even report on.
Right.
So I think
Yeah.
tags.
Kill it, or merge it. Right. Like that's part of the system. You need to be able to say, "Hey, I've been gathering this, but I'm not.
Yeah,
I've gathered
yeah,
it three
yeah, yeah,
times, but I'm seeing 15 of these other things. So let's merge them. Right. And let's bring all that data together because we're going to call it something else. Cool.
So with
Excellent.
emerging, for example, that would be for like types of surgery. For example, in my spine, racial disparities.
Okay.
There we
Okay.
go. So I had a bunch of different kinds of surgery. I hope I can find it now. There's so many here now.
Yeah. These are big hierarchies.
Yeah. Um, for example, for race, right? We had white, non-Hispanic. So based
Yeah.
on what was reported most oftenly, we use these tags, especially through synthesis,
Yeah.
qualitative. Yeah, here we go. So I go crazy on this one. So zoom into, for example,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, race. Okay, yeah. So here you can kind of
Right.
count with the filter. Okay, I have this many white, I have this many black. So maybe I can
Right.
combine, I can do white versus black versus other. And
Yep.
just seeing the number in this kind of way helps to visualize it. Um, I haven't been able to integrate this into my papers. I think that'd be kind of interesting to be able to export the sunburst. So I'll usually make tables. So I'll put this number next to
Sure.
white. I'll put this number next to black. But again, I use this almost every single time.
Sure.
The Prisma, very helpful. Every paper wants you to report this, and I can just auto-generate it. Um, and that kind of gets me out of having to make it myself as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Beyond that, how do I go back? Go back to all of it. Here we go. Yeah. And then extraction too. Extraction I've been using less lately just because I've been doing more qualitative.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's very helpful. And then so on the back end, what I do is I export all this data, and I've configured my R code to work based on the export. So when I get the export out, I
Sure.
don't touch it at all, and that goes straight into my R. And I've already made the code to get the forest plots out, so I don't have to really change it. So after you do it once, it's much easier. And then I'll even like run forest plots for other people because I have the code.
Right. Right.
So I always change everything in here, because once you start messing with the Excel by hand, then you forget, wait, did I change it there? Did I change it here? What version was this? So
Right.
I always keep everything in nested and then just export and upload to R.
And you've been able to adapt your previous workflow to that. That's excellent. Really cool. Okay, let's talk hacks. So you've done some things here like that. Obviously allocation is typically a business feature, and the way our users use it, that's kind of how that works. But you've been able to figure out how to do allocation with just tagging, which I think is great. That's awesome. It's just thinking outside the box to get something done creatively. What are some other kind of like hacks, things that you use nested knowledge, maybe in the way that it wasn't necessarily intended to be used, but it's helped you get work done more quickly?
Um, Basically the things I mentioned, the allocating
Okay.
to other people, the using the needs tags to kind of say what needs to be done, the bulk action as well, just to kind of assign those to people as much as possible. Using the literature search to search on PubMed independent of nested.
Yeah.
And then honestly, just again, for screening, if you're screening 1,500 papers and you have four
Yeah.
people on it, it just kind of happens much faster. In fact, for this paper itself, I actually got together four students in the same room one night, and we just sat
Mm.
down and just screened at the same time on a round table. And when you do
Yeah.
that, you kind of configure, because there's always exceptions that come up, right? So your screening reasons are always
Sure.
changing, because like what goes into what category? Do I make a new category? Do we merge them? So being in the same room for like 3 hours straight, you just keep asking, you kind of agree right then and there. There's no like Zoom calls, it doesn't get interrupted.
Yeah.
And you can screen
Yeah.
1,500 in 3 hours if you're five people. So again,
It's sort of like a normalizing exercise, right? So you do the first little bit together, and now you're all on the same page, and you go off and you can do the rest of it because you kind of know what everybody's thinking, and how people are thinking about this particular project. That's
exactly,
a
like
great idea.
one person's question answers the same question for other people. If someone's doing something wrong, I can catch it right then and there and ask them
Yeah.
to change it. So the screening as well has been very helpful, especially when collaborating, and especially when you have 1,500 papers to go through. If you have 300,
Yeah.
if you have 200, honestly, do it yourself, because it just keeps it more consistent. But
Right.
when you get to the bigger numbers, you really have to ask for a friend's help.
Yeah, yeah, and that's okay too. That's a part of it. It's you're not going to lose any publication currency by
Yeah,
collaborating. In
yeah,
fact,
yeah.
it's kind of how research is designed to it's supposed to be done, right? That's what I'm trying to say. So
I
yeah.
totally agree. I think in your first year, you'll learn how to do the research, and then later on, you
Mm,
learn how to like delegate and how to keep it consistent.
hmm.
Apply apply your research question in a uniform way across all stages of it, and make sure everyone's aligned. Like all that coordination itself is hard. It gets tricky because there's always exceptions.
Hmm.
But once you can get better at that, that's when you can really get very productive.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, if you're just joining us, I'm talking to Izzet Akosman. He is a almost done with medical school. He's almost done. He's almost a doctor, and he's telling us about how he used nested knowledge to get published early and often in his medical career. So yeah. So I wanna just leave a little bit of time for questions. If people do have questions for Zet here, feel free to drop them in the chat wherever you're watching today, on LinkedIn, whether it's YouTube, wherever, and I'll try to get those to him, and you can ask as many questions as you'd like, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. With the few minutes that we have remaining here, though, is that let's talk a little bit about your one of your personal projects, something you hold near and dear. I want to hear more about Surge Timer, because you are also becoming an entrepreneur in your own right, even in the midst of finishing up medical school. And tell us a little bit about that. Maybe you can share your screen, just walk us through what you're working on. Because yeah, we're a startup, you're a startup. I always love to see what other people are working on, and I think this one is interesting. It's cool.
Yeah, thank you. So I wouldn't say entrepreneur yet. I'm starting. But a
Okay.
lot of the steps that I'm taking now, I'm kind of copying from what Nested was back in the day. So I see myself doing the same things, being on the same calls, answering the same questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, Surge Timer is the website is here. It's a way of collecting more granular time data from operations. So usually the only time points that are kept are the first incision and the final time of closure. But there really isn't any data in hospital systems or in the literature about what happens in between the incision and the closure. And this has been my research project at Cornell. And I started this app for myself, but we've been branching out to other surgical fields, hand surgery, knee and hip as well. Trying to get this more granular data out of a lot of cases at the same time. The way it works is, and I actually have students timing today. So these are the two cases they're doing. So we're doing an L3, L5 XLIF and an L3, L5 fusion. And this is an interface for people to cut for either medical students, researchers, anyone in the OR. It could be one of the device reps or it could be one of the nurses. They have this in their hand and they're able to time the different stages. So here we have exposure, TLIF, screw placement, rod placement, and closure. In fact, I think this case is still going on right now. We'll keep track of comments on the side. So when the TLIF graph goes in, when X-ray starts and ends, and all this data gets compiled together so you can have a better understanding. Here, same thing, we have an XLIF, and it's still going on right now. And because it's very standardized, you can have multiple students working at the same time, and it helps keep the data entry consistent. I tried doing this with Excel in the beginning, and it really wasn't going anywhere. And then the beauty of this is once you have that data, you can start visualizing it, and you can get creative with it as well. So for example, we have three surgeons. You can see how many cases they've done, average case duration, or you can see the number of pedicle screws they put in as well. So to kind of see how many you're doing, what your progress is like. You can see, for example, if you have your vertebra on the x-axis here, what levels you're working on. So this surgeon is more lumbar focused. This one is more thoracic and lumbar. You can also see where your time is being allocated in the OR based on the stages that you're timing to kind of see where you can improve on, if you want to invest in new techniques, or if you want to look at maybe new screws, and you're spending a lot of time placing screws, that's kind of one avenue you can pursue. Or you can kind of see your cases in some kind of an order. So you can see you were doing an exposure, you started doing screws, and then you went back to exposure, and then back to screws. And then you can see the order in which you went through your cases compared to your mentor or your juniors, as a way of educating, or just kind of see what your cases look like. I think it's interesting in and of itself. And then there's also countless research possibilities as well. So you can, on the x-axis, put the number of levels you fused. Y-axis, you can put your stage duration, color by surgeon, and then look at your screw placement. So here you see the surgeon in the green, their time for screw placement is pretty consistent regardless of the levels they fuse. But the surgeon in blue here changes a lot more. So that's a level of difference in skill, or maybe it's a difference in the patient population. This kind of granular time data helps you better investigate these sub stages of these long cases. And if anyone is interested in beginning and timing, it's completely free. Just contact me and we can get you set up with an account. And this could be a new avenue of research. Again, there's no publications about granular time data in almost any surgical field. So I'm predicting that in the future, it's going to get bigger and bigger and could be a way of really improving surgical efficiency.
Absolutely. I think your product is really coming along. It's really looking really excellent. I'll be looking forward to watching your progress as you develop it, as you start to publish with it, and use your tool to kind of do some really interesting research. I've thrown his email up on the screen, so you can use that QR code to send him a message right now if you want to. I've also got just a link to his website, so you can scan that QR code as well and go to surgetimer.com and just check it out for yourself. As he said, it's free, at least for the moment. He's still spinning it up. He's still exploring what's possible with it, and I think that's great. We're closing in on a tidy little half hour here, is that, and I just want to thank you so much for taking the time today to just talk about your experience using nested knowledge, talk about your experience in medical school, collaborating with others, getting published early, getting first author early, as well as sharing your new app. So excited to see where you go, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you, and thank you for the time. If there's anyone that would like to, again, talk about making more nests as well, I teach nested knowledge to people all the time in med school. Every year there's a new batch of M1s coming in, and they're excited about research. And every year I have like 3 or 4 people that I work with me. And then down the road, I have other students that I worked on nests in their first year who now include me on their nests, on their projects, now that they're second and third years. So the umbrella kind of grows.
It does.
And
Excellent.
I think meta-analysis is a great way in med school to be in research. I think everything else has a lot of challenges. This thing you can do on your own. And it's helped me a lot.
Awesome. Well, your email's up on the screen. If anyone wants to reach out, it's right there. And I'll try to link to some of your publications as well in the show notes in the description as well, so people can see what you've worked on in the past. So I'll update that after the show ends. Thanks so much, Izzet. Let's talk soon.